You know, Bill Gates once said something pretty wild.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he said that while a great lathe operator might be worth like a few times an average one, a great writer of software is worth 10,000 times the price of an average one. Ugh.
10,000. That is, I mean, that's a staggering number.
Right. And then you have Reed Hastings over at Netflix making a very similar point. He argues that the best engineers don't just add 10 times the value to a company, they add 100 times the value,
Wow.
which honestly completely breaks the basic factory line math of human productivity we're all so used to, where adding one worker just equals 1 unit of output.
It really does. It forces a total recalculation of how we view human capital. I mean, if those numbers are even remotely accurate, you're no longer dealing with a linear progression of skill.
Exactly.
You're dealing with a completely different category of work, which sounds almost mythological.
The mythical 10x engineer. You hear whispers about them all across Silicon Valley, and today, for you listening, whether you are an eager learner, a tech enthusiast, or maybe a manager desperately trying to build a high-performing team, we are taking a massive stack of sources to figure out if these unicorns actually exist.
And we've got some great material for this.
We really do. We are pulling from Talent Whisperers, specifically their 10x Engineer root cause framework, also the resilience engine research, and several really dense papers on the neurobiology of human growth.
Yeah, those were fascinating.
So our mission for this deep dive into the source material is to decode the root cause of the 10x engineer, because the sources are very clear. They are not a myth. But, and this is crucial, they also aren't born with some magical, unapproachable IQ.
Right. The premise running through all of these documents is that the 10x multiplier doesn't come from raw processing power or, innate genius. It comes from a highly optimized internal operating system. The individuals we label as 10x have developed this profound capacity for what the researchers call learned resilience.
So let's look at the foundational code of that operating system. The sources point straight to Carol Dweck's concept of the growth mindset, but they apply it specifically to highly complex, creative problem solving. For an average developer with a fixed mindset, intelligence is static. It's like a hand of cards you were dealt at birth. So when they push a piece of code and it completely breaks the production environment...
Which happens to everyone, by the way.
Right. But their brain interprets that failure as a personal verdict. It proves they just aren't smart enough.
And because of that, they will instinctively hide the failure or blame QA or deflect because the psychological cost of owning it is just too high.
Exactly. But the 10x engineer runs on a fundamentally different script. They view intelligence and capability as something developed entirely through friction.
Yeah, through struggle.
To them, a broken production environment isn't a verdict on their identity. It's just raw, neutral data. It's literally just a signal telling them a specific assumption was incorrect.
They actually hunt for that friction.
Yeah.
And the sources attribute this to a second psychological mechanism, which is metacognition.
Right, which goes beyond just having a positive attitude.
Exactly. Metacognition is basically the practice of thinking about your own thinking. The 10x engineer is constantly running this background process, monitoring how they learn, evaluating their own understanding, and tweaking their strategies mid-flight.
Like, why did I assume this API would return the data this way?
Yeah, or what cognitive blind spot led me there. Metacognition provides the diagnostic tools, and the growth mindset provides the psychological safety to use those tools without, ego getting in the way.
Okay, let's unpack this, though, because I have to push back a little bit.
Sure.
In a really high-pressure tech environment, isn't thinking about thinking just a fancy way of saying overthinking?
That's a fair question.
Like, if I am constantly analyzing every single cognitive leap I make, I usually end up just staring blankly at my monitor, completely paralyzed by analysis. How does a 10x engineer avoid just getting bogged down in their own mental recursive loops?
So what's fascinating here is that the paralysis you're describing is a symptom of rumination, not metacognition.
Oh, interesting. What's the difference?
Rumination is entirely passive. It's this closed loop of self-doubt where you just replay a mistake over and over without extracting any actionable data from it.
Just beating yourself up.
Exactly. But metacognition is an active diagnostic tool with a very specific utility. A 10x engineer doesn't sit around pondering the philosophical nature of their mistake.
Right.
They extract the technical variable that caused the error, they update their internal mental model, and they immediately deploy a new attempt.
Okay, so if this diagnostic mindset is the software, it still needs processing power to run. It needs actual hardware.
Yes.
And Our sources take a really fascinating pivot away from psychology here and go straight into hard neurobiology.
Oh, this part is incredible.
It really is. The 10X engineer is physically wiring their brain differently.
We are looking at a specific brain region called the anterior midcingulate cortex, or the AMCC. In the neuroscience literature, the AMCC essentially acts as the brain's resilience engine.
The resilience engine.
Yeah, it is the literal intersection where your emotional state, your sense of effort, and your motor actions all converge.
It's basically the physical ledger of willpower. Like when you hit a massive roadblock in a project, your AMCC is the accountant calculating the metabolic cost.
That's a great way to put it. The AMCC performs this instant subconscious cost-benefit analysis. It asks, is the sheer amount of glucose and effort required to solve this really complex problem worth the anticipated reward?
And for a vast majority of people, when a task becomes highly ambiguous and frustrating, the AMCC throttles down, right?
Right. It signals the body to retreat, to seek an easier path. But individuals operating at that 10x level have physically conditioned their AMCC to do the exact opposite. They've literally trained it to lean into the ambiguity.
And the sources illustrate exactly how they train it with this wild anecdote about the 100-fall day.
Oh, I love this part.
It's so good. The author of the Talent Whisperers piece talks about taking a friend named Joe to an expert-level ski mountain
Right.
on his second day ever on skis.
Which, I mean, that violates every pedagogical rule of skiing out there.
Yeah.
You were supposed to start on a gentle, highly predictable bunny slope.
Exactly. You do long, slow runs where the variables are totally controlled. But instead, they took Joe to the summit, dealing with high winds and steep drops, and had him do incredibly short, highly intense traverses across the slope.
Yeah, and he fell, what, over 100 times?
Over 100 times in a single afternoon. But because the distance between the start of the traverse and the fall was so short, the feedback loop was instantaneous.
He wasn't falling all the way down a mountain, which would just induce trauma and rumination.
Right.
He was falling 5 feet.
Yeah.
He could immediately sense that, oh, his left shoulder dipped too low or his weight shifted too far back.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this translates so perfectly to the tech world.
How so?
It's like deploying 100 tiny micro updates a day instead of one massive, terrifying system overhaul once a year. The cost of failing is so small that you actually learn faster.
Oh, absolutely. That analogy is spot on. If you push a massive update and it crashes, finding the bug is a nightmare. Too many variables.
Right.
But with microcommits, you get instant stack trace feedback on your own failure.
And the biological mechanism backing up that pipeline analogy is a process called myelination.
Right.
Every single time Joe fell, recognized the error, and willfully pushed through that specific physical friction point on the next attempt, his brain responded by adding a microscopic layer of insulation myelin around that specific neural circuit.
It's basically upgrading the wiring from copper to fiber optic. The electrical signals start traveling faster and with much higher precision.
A willful, conscious struggle slowly converts into a high-speed automatic reflex.
And the sources formalize this daily myelination process into what they call the THRIV loop. 10x engineers inherently structure their entire workflow around this specific cycle.
Let's break that acronym down because it really demystifies the magic of these engineers. T stands for tackle. They don't try to build the whole app. They pick a right-size specific challenge, like optimizing one slow database query.
Right. And H is hypothesize. Instead of just guessing, they form an atomic scientific step, like, if I add this specific index, I predict latency drops by 20 milliseconds.
The R is reach. This is the activation of the AMCC putting in the actual uncomfortable effort to write the code and test the hypothesis.
Then comes I for inspect. This relies heavily on that growth mindset we discussed earlier. They evaluate the outcome blamelessly. Did the latency drop?
And if it spiked instead, they don't panic.
Exactly. They just read the logs.
V is value. They internalize what they just learned about the database schema. And finally, E is energize. They actually step away and recover. They complete the engine cycle so they don't burn out the hardware.
And that recovery phase is so critical. It ensures they stay in what the researchers call the stretch zone, which is the precise physiological state where myelin actually grows.
Because if you bypass recovery and just grind endlessly...
You bypass myelination entirely and cross into the snap zone.
Yeah.
That's where chronic stress degrades cognitive function. 10X engineers are absolute masters of staying in the stretch zone through thousands of these rapid feedback-rich microloops.
Okay, so we have an individual running this flawless internal system. They have the metacognitive software, the highly myelinated hardware, and they are constantly running THR-IVE loops.
Right.
But software development and really modern work in general is a team sport.
It is.
So what happens when you drop this highly optimized engine into an open plan office or, a shared Slack channel? Because the stereotype of the genius engineer is the lone wolf with noise-canceling headphones who just refuses to talk to anyone.
Oh yeah, but the data completely shatters that lone wolf myth. A true 10X engineer's value is heavily derived from the environmental uplift they create. We are essentially looking at the contagion of high performance.
There is an incredible piece of research highlighted here from the Kellogg School of Management. They studied the spatial dynamics of workers and found that simply sitting within a 25-foot radius of a high-performing colleague increases an average employee's performance by 15%.
Just from proximity.
Right.
Just being near them.
It demonstrates social contagion theory perfectly.
Yeah.
Humans are highly adaptive creatures. We unconsciously mirror the norms, the pacing, and the emotional regulation of the people around us. So a 10X engineer elevates the collective intelligence of the room by modeling that growth mindset in real time.
And the sources mentioned code reviews as a prime example of this. An average or insecure engineer uses a code review to assert dominance, to aggressively point out flaws.
Which just makes the author defensive and completely shuts down learning. Exactly. But a 10X engineer frames the review as a collaborative gift. They use their metacognition to ask the author questions that guide them to the solution, rather than just rewriting it for them.
They reduce the cognitive friction for everyone else. By removing defensiveness from the environment, the team stops wasting metabolic energy navigating egos and starts spending that energy actually solving the technical problem.
But the Kellogg study also measured the dark side of this contagion, the negative spillover. Proximity to a toxic worker. Someone who might be technically brilliant but has a fixed mindset, blames others, and hoards knowledge, that can decrease the surrounding team's performance by up to 30%.
Yeah, a toxic worker creates a massive cognitive tax. They increase the workload for everyone else by refusing to document their work or collaborate. They shatter team morale.
And eventually, the surrounding engineers begin mirroring their cynical, defensive habits just to survive the environment.
So damaging.
It's like the 10X engineer is a massive Wi-Fi signal booster sitting in the middle of the office. They make everyone's connection to the problem faster, smoother, and more reliable just by being there.
I love that analogy.
Whereas the toxic employee is a lead-lined wall, deadening the signal and forcing everyone around them to work twice as hard to get basic information.
That Wi-Fi metaphor is highly accurate, but it requires a really crucial caveat when we apply it to modern work.
Which is?
In a remote or hybrid environment, that Wi-Fi signal isn't transmitted automatically. If a 10X engineer isolates themselves in their home office and only communicates through, brief Jira updates, the contagion drops to zero. Virtual proximity requires highly deliberate transmission.
Okay, so if it's just about proximity, how does this work remotely? How do they broadcast that signal through a screen?
Through intentional asynchronous collaboration, they actively narrate their THR-IVE loops in public Slack channels. They jump into virtual pair programming sessions.
They record quick screen shares explaining a complex architectural decision.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 10X contagion in a remote setting is cultural, not spatial. When they deliberately assume positive intent in a text-based environment, that 15% performance uplift penetrates right through the screen.
So if a true 10X engineer acts as a multiplier for the whole team, and a toxic worker acts as a 30% tax on everyone around them, the stakes for getting the hiring process right are just astronomical.
Oh, absolutely. You have to prevent that lead-lined wall from ever getting through the door.
But how do leaders actually spot a 10Xer in a standard interview, especially when every single candidate's resume is polished to absolute perfection these days?
You have to completely redesign the architecture of the interview. The Talent Whisperers framework operates on one golden rule. You do not hire people for what they know. You hire them for why they know it.
Don't hire for what they know, hire for why they know it. I mean, the current knowledge base of an engineer is going to be obsolete in 3 years anyway.
Exactly.
You are trying to figure out if their AMCC is conditioned to go out and learn the next paradigm?
Precisely. And to test that, you have to push them immediately outside their comfort zone. You present them with a complex systems design problem that you know they do not have the answer to.
Because you are not evaluating if they get the right answer.
No, you are stressing their internal operating system to see how it reacts to ambiguity. Do they stall out? Do they try to bluff their way through it?
Do they get defensive when you point out a flaw in their logic? That is your fixed mindset revealing itself.
Exactly. Or, conversely, do they grab the virtual whiteboard, start asking clarifying questions, and actually become visibly energized by the puzzle? That is the growth mindset playing out in real time.
And the sources lean heavily on the work of behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman here, specifically his concept of delayed intuition.
Right, because humans are notoriously terrible at interviewing due to the halo effect.
Oh, yeah. We subconsciously decide if we want to hire someone within the first 2 minutes based on a shared interest or a gut feeling.
And then we spend the next 40 minutes asking leading questions just to confirm our own bias.
Kahneman argues that the brain loves that cognitive shortcut, and you have to aggressively force it to slow down. So, if you are a manager conducting a 45-minute Zoom interview, Kahneman suggests spending the first 30 minutes strictly gathering empirical data.
You score the candidate on a rigid rubric, analytical ability, communication clarity, technical baseline using factual situational questions.
You do not let your gut feeling enter the room. You force your brain to act like an algorithm first.
And only at the very end of the process, during the last 15 minutes, after all the objective data is captured and scored, do you allow your intuition back in.
And you use that intuition for a very specific purpose, uncovering what the sources call the core why.
Yes. The sources reference evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar here and his concept of the deep substory.
You want to establish a genuine emotional connection to figure out the intrinsic motivation driving this person. And to get there, the documents recommend a specific, highly unconventional final interview question. They say you should ask, if you look back on your life, can you find one moment or event that changed who you are and how you see the world?
It's a heavy question.
See, so what does this all mean for the interviewer? Because I read that and immediately felt a bit of friction. If I'm interviewing an engineer to build out a secure back-end payment system, and I suddenly pivot to asking them about a deeply personal, life-changing event,
Right.
isn't there a massive risk of crossing professional boundaries? Does a hiring manager really want the interview to suddenly feel like a therapy session?
Well, it requires an incredible amount of tact, and the interviewer has to frame it as an exploration of drive, not trauma. The goal isn't psychoanalysis.
Okay.
The goal is locating the fuel source for their AMCC. Complex software development is grueling.
Mm-hmm.
Without a core, why? A profound intrinsic sense of purpose. When the servers crash at 3 a.m. and the logs are incomprehensible, the brain simply refuses to allocate the metabolic energy required to fix it.
It just collapses into complexity-induced anxiety. They hit the snap zone and log off.
Exactly. But if you can uncover their core why and align it with the company's mission, you unlock an entirely different gear. The sources offer a brilliant case study from the early days of Twitch for this.
Oh, right. When they were a small, niche streaming platform, they didn't just hire generic senior engineers who wanted a paycheck.
No, they aggressively targeted engineers who are also deeply passionate, competitive gamers.
So when the video servers start dropping frames at 3 a.m. during a massive esports tournament, the generic engineer hits a wall because they are just working for salary.
But the gamer engineer pushes through the ambiguity, forces their AMCC to stay engaged, and writes the patch because their tournament is on the line.
Their intrinsic motivation aligns perfectly with the technical challenge.
The alignment of the core why with the corporate mission is the ultimate catalyst. It's what ensures the THRIVE loops keep turning when the work gets genuinely difficult.
Let's bring all these threads together for you listening. We set out to find the root cause of the mythical 10x engineer. And they aren't a myth, and they aren't born with a 10,000x IQ.
No, they are constructed.
They build themselves through a relentless growth mindset that strips the ego out of failure. They utilize metacognition to constantly debug their own thought processes.
They willingly endure the 100-fall day, constantly pushing the limits of their anterior mid-cingulate cortex to wrap myelin around their neural circuits.
They act as a massive Wi-Fi booster, deliberately transmitting that learned resilience to everyone within a 25-foot radius. And beneath it all, they are powered by an infectious core, why that simply refuses to quit.
It really demands that we stop viewing highly complex work as just typing commands into a machine and start recognizing it as an ongoing practice of biological and psychological transformation.
It changes the entire paradigm. But before we wrap up, there is one final, incredibly provocative thought buried in the depths of our sources today.
Oh, the 110th concept.
Yeah, we spend so much time obsessing over the unicorns. We search for the 10x engineer. We try to optimize our funnels for them. We restructure our interviews to find them. But what about the 110th engineer?
It's the complete opposite end of the spectrum. The employee operating at a fraction of their actual potential.
The sources suggest that the 110th engineer is very real, and they are everywhere. This is the team member who lacks motivation, who is crushed by technical debt, who stalls out at the slightest ambiguity, or who is just retreated into survival mode.
Yeah.
And here is the challenging part for any leader listening. If a leader decides to conduct a root cause analysis of a 110th engineer, the sources suggest they might actually find themselves looking in the mirror.
It's a sobering reality check. If a 10x engineer thrives because of a supportive environment that rewards the stretch zone, the 110th engineer is often the product of an environment that punishes it.
Have we, as leaders or teammates, taken the wind out of their sails? Have we built an architecture that punishes a broken build instead of treating it as valuable data?
Have we micromanaged their THRIVE loops into non-existence?
Human performance isn't a clean, linear spreadsheet. It is a messy, complex landscape driven by deep biological engines and psychological safety. The next time you face a massive roadblock or the next time you are trying to figure out why your team isn't clicking, don't look for the quick spreadsheet fix. Look for the core why. Are you aiming for the safety of the bunny slope, or are you finally ready for the 100-fall day? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Until next time, keep examining your own loops and keep searching for your why.